Guys, a very warm welcome back to the Trusted podcast.
Over a 20-year career, Brian McLaughlin has transformed himself from a naive regional sales rep with a taste for the high life into one of the most effective sales leaders in the business.
Brian's overcome many challenges in his career, but he's always continued to invest in himself, paving the way for those that have followed in his footsteps.
Sit back, grab a cuppa, and enjoy the content. Brian, welcome to the Trusted podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All the way down from sunny Glasgow.
Yes, indeed, mate. Although I don't think it's too sunny today. I think it's pouring the rain, so it's nice to be away. I've got my suntan lotion on when I'm down here, just in case.
This must be the one sunny day a year that we get in the northwest, so I think you've caught us on a good day.
Well, having lived in Manchester for 7 years, and people used to say Manchester's wetter than Glasgow, and I can vouch that it's not. It's definitely not wetter than Glasgow, so yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. What we want to do is we want to start right back at the beginning and get a little bit of an understanding about your background. So tell us a little bit about how your upbringing shaped your career.
Great first question. God. Look, I'm a working class guy from Glasgow. My dad was a lorry driver. My mum was a dinner lady at my school. I never... didn't know. I didn't have a lot of money at the time, but it's not until you get a bit older you look back and you realise that. But we had a nice life. I didn't feel like we didn't have a nice life, but what I saw from my parents was just graft, hard work and effort. And genuinely, that's when I meet people in the industry now and they ask me this type of question, or if it's young people coming through in the industry, I always point to that. Just learning that hard work does pay off. Applying yourself, never stop learning, all that kind of all the stuff that people say, but actually I'm never quite sure where they actually believe it. I genuinely did from the very start, that was important, and my dad instilled that in me. My hero to this day, he's 82-year-old, and I still look back and think this guy instilled in me that you put in the effort, you learn, you read, you understand, and yeah, you that's a good foundation for success.
Definitely.
You started off your career in financial services, I think early 2000s.
Yeah, 2000. Yeah.
Similar to myself and Will, started on the phones, which can be really interesting. How did that kind of influence your approach to sales, relationship management at that early stage?
If I'm being really honest, I hated it. I found it so difficult and so challenging. I don't know how you guys found it as you sort of move through your career, but I've always been very comfortable face to face with people and friends, and it goes back to when I was younger. I would always be happy standing up and telling jokes and singing in front of family members. Irish Catholic family growing up, everybody had a song. Christmas parties, family parties, So I was very comfortable with other people face to face. Group settings never fazed me. But then I got when you're isolated on a telephone, you're just looking at a screen and you've got a number to phone, and there's somebody you don't know or they don't know you. I found it incredibly challenging. But then you sort of look around and you start to see, right, oh, that's what they're saying, and he's saying this and she's saying that, and this is their pitch. And you start to sort of refine how you go about it. But I found it incredibly difficult, and I still think to this day, and I still talk to my team in the telephone sales, and I'm very honest and frank with them and say, it's the hardest job.
Yeah.
Much, much harder than face to face.
It is. It's a very interesting one. Some of the guests that we've spoken to so far have different opinions on kind of cold calling, telephony, different stuff like that. Do you still see it as a kind of core part of what sales do, and is it essential?
It's a tricky one. Look, people are more and more precious with their time, I think. Nowadays, there's a lot of providers, there's a lot of choice, there's a lot of phones ringing. They say, I'm from such and such a company, be it platforms, risk providers, fund providers, tax efficient providers. There's a lot of people trying to get financial advisors' time. And for me, telephone sales, when you're phoning, it's an easy one to say, I'm not available, However, I still think it provides a real valuable resource for the IFAs to know they've got that point of contact, or for the clients to know they've got that point of contact, because they know the field-based sales guy or girl will be running around busy in meetings. So having that telephone point of contact is critical, if you ask me. However, I think how they sell has to change and evolve. And I think that's what I've seen over the years. It's, from sort of the cold call, the sort of I've got stuff to tell you, Mr. Advisor, through to how do you be far more consultative in your telephone sales nowadays. And I think that's the difference from when I go back 20 years, it was, I've got proof fund to sell you as a Prudential, you need to buy this because it's 6.5% expected growth rate. You need it. You use onshore bonds, and where else are you going to go? That was fine when there was a sort of a binary products available. You come to now when IFAs are like, well, what do you bring me? What technical support, what resource, what value do you add to my business? Yeah. And just sort of a ramming a product down your throat or whatever it may be doesn't work.
Yeah,
I think it's invaluable.
Marcus and I came up through that school, and Lewis to an extent, of this activity-driven sales pipeline management structure that, although I'm in the same camp as you, Marcus is far more comfortable on the phone than I am. Mm-hmm. It taught us a really strong foundation that activity, almost that dogged relentlessness, was what would then set you up quite nicely for a more mature sales position. Yeah. So although I hated it, I found it really uncomfortable. Similar to you, really. Yeah. Emotional intelligence is a big way to close out deals, isn't it? When you're able to read body language and all that. But you still live and die by the phone at this point.
I think obviously, I don't know if you know, Brian, but we don't live in the region that we service.
Yeah, right, okay.
So when I'm having to look after the Southeast, I have to be very selective with my time, and there has to be a screening process to go through. Yeah. So starts phones, virtual. Yeah. Let's go.
That brings efficiency.
Yeah, exactly.
I say to the telephone sales guys in my team, and I literally recount stories of, when I was on the phone after about a year or two of being a sort of telephone account manager, I would say to the advisors, look, because my area at the time was Edinburgh and I lived in Glasgow, the Prudential office was in Stirling, and I'd be like, look, I'll just pop over and see you. And I started almost becoming a field-based salesperson. Yeah. And I would just go to my agent and say, they want me to go and see them, And this was a bit before the times of call listening, call recording, it wasn't really there at that point. So you imagine, be like, all right, okay. So I was almost forcing their hand to let me go out. And then it was a case of, well, now I'm showing the results from me going out and seeing these clients. So I kind of thought, and I was saying that unfortunately most telephone salespeople can't do that, because they're not, our team's in London, they're selling all over the north from Birmingham up. So you can't just go out the office. You've got to do the hard graft on the phone. And there's a bit of me that says it's good to have that foundation because you learn hard work, effort. You learn rejection, which is a massive part of what we all do in this industry. There's a lot of no's, and you've got to have a thick skin, and you've got to develop that. And I see that when new people join the business, when they're on the phone and they do the introductory calls to say, I've joined the Northwest region, I'm such and such, I'm here to talk about, introduce myself, tell you a wee bit about what we do. And that's fine, that introductory call, great. But then when they go to the sort of a next stage of calls, they really sort of hit barriers because they're like, oh no, what if they say this, and what if they say they're not interested, or I phoned and they don't want to talk to me, and it's how they, and then it's just sort of shaping that, right, okay, how do you add value, how do you become consultative, how do you understand their business, and that's the bit, but just that learning that rejection is really fundamentally important for me as well.
Yeah, makes sense. And it's almost that aspect as well, so learning the rejection and that dealing with that, building your resilience to a certain point, but from your point of view it was almost playing to your strengths as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's going to make you effective.
And I think, like, I never know whether you have a natural aptitude for this job or it's sort of in your DNA, if you're a people person. I hear all these sort of phrases bandied around, and can you teach somebody who's very analytical and detailed to be a people person? I've done all these sort of behavioral psychological tests over the years of different guises, and I've been put as a red and a yellow. What that means, I'm a salesperson because I've got this dedication, but also I'm a people person because I'm happy and friendly and all the rest of it. And then I meet people who are blues and greens who are more analytical and detailed, and I've seen those people become good salespeople. But I think it's a harder barrier. They've got the bar's higher for them to go over because they don't have that natural, whether it's charisma or likability or whatever. They've got minds of knowledge, they could recount and tell you every single stock within a fund and why we invest in that company, but they're not necessarily relatable and likable. And so it means it maybe take you 6 or 7 meetings to actually get to that point. Yeah. Whereas I think the really sort of personable people tend to go over that barrier straight away because it's really, well, they're a really nice person. And that gets you, it's a good inroad, isn't it? Yeah. I'm not saying you can't do it the other way because depending on who you're selling to, that person may be analytical and detailed, so you find common ground, don't you? But I think it does genuinely help just having that sort of a fundamental likability about you as a person. I mean, I sit here arrogantly and say I think I've got it, but you know what I mean. Whether I started that way or I developed that, it's certainly something that I think is key.
Yeah, makes total sense. So I think one of the bits that we were really interested in when we were speaking to you initially was you moved down to Manchester and you were kind of that young, naive regional sales guy, and you were, making the most of it whilst you were down there.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that, what that experience was like.
Loads of mistakes, loads of errors, loads of failures. So I went from being a telephone. So I was at sales support. So, literally doing illustrations and booking appointments through a telephone account manager where you had your own sort of a panel, and then into field based very, very quickly. And I think for me, there was a naivety that I thought I knew it all because I'd done a couple of meetings face to face. I'd been in some joint meetings, I sat there as a sort of silent partner, a sidekick, and with experienced account managers, and thought I can do this job, no problem. And it is once you actually get out on your own and you've got your own panel and the numbers on your head then, and there's a regional sales director looking at you saying, right, who are you seeing, what you selling, how you selling it, your numbers aren't good, all this kind of stuff. To me, that as a young, naive salesperson, then you start to do sort of irrational things and you start to think of, any way of getting in front of people. And that's when you make mistakes, because there was no real plan. There was no real formulated agenda. It was just, try and get in front of people and then try and sell them stuff without actually understanding who they were, what they are, what their business is like, what their needs or wants are, all the stuff that I knew because I'd been trained, but then you sort of, I just flap a little bit and start thinking about how do I just get some money in the door. Yeah. And as a young guy, I moved down to Manchester with my girlfriend at the time, and naturally I gravitated towards IFAs who were in Manchester, even though my region was much bigger than that. So I gravitated towards people who were social because I was like, well, I want to go out. So it was like, when we'll go for beers, and it was in a time when that was a bit more accepted in the industry. Yeah. So it was more, you became friends with some of your clients, but then you realise quickly that people use you as well, so you've like, company credit card, we'll go to restaurant, bar and grill, and we'll sit and have, drinks all night, and we'll have food, and it's 2 a.m, and you're cashing up, and you're like, that's 1,200 quid, and then you find out that the 2 IFAs that you'd out were actually, they were fairly junior, and they've got no real say over what happens. You're like, well, but you're badging it to your manager that you've done this fantastic job, and like, I was out with them at 2 a.m, as if that's some sort of badge of honour. But it doesn't lead to anything because actually I was just trying to make pals when I first moved to Manchester. And that was my route to making pals, as opposed to how do I write new business? How do I, ingratiate myself to IFA businesses and show I add value to them? So there's loads of mistakes. I like that. Loads of corporate expenses blowing. We used to do this thing called the Friday Club, where we would take the top floor of Restaurant Bar and Grill in Manchester, and we just invite everybody along. Yeah. And what happened was you would get, one person, one IFA of note, and then you would just get like the admin staff. And it was great because you got to know everybody, but there was no real decision makers in the room. So you were pals with everybody else, and it was free drink and food and all the rest of it. And we'd do it for about 3 or 4 hours. And you thought that added value. And then when you were trying to then go back to those people to try and work a way of getting something from it, you were finding there was barriers there because you actually, again, you were bringing people along that you didn't even know if they could support you or not. And then you found out when you phoned up, like, we don't use onshore bonds at, I was at Pru, or we don't, we use Royal London for pensions exclusively, or we're tied to this firm because we're a network. And you're like, oh my God, I've just blown. And we've done it every month, every Friday, the last Friday every month. So loads of mistakes, loads of errors, loads of naivety, forgetting my fundamental training and the skills that I had been drilled into me at Prudential, because I was very fortunate at Pru. They sort of designed what they called the fast track plan, and it was for telephone account managers to go into the field, and I was a sort of a guinea pig in effect. And they gave me all this training, it was everything from basic sales skills, presentation training, all the way through to understanding sort of the financials of business, all that kind of stuff. So I had all that in my brain, and then as soon as I got to Manchester, it was just how do I go out and get drunk with IFAs, and think that's how you do it.
Yeah, it's fair to say you've obviously learned from all of that, because you've gone on a tremendous career over the past 25, 26 years. You're now obviously head of the North at Octopus. What do you put kind of your success down to get into that position?
I've had some fantastic role models in my career, and I always say that because some of the role models have been what not to do. And for some of your career, you look at them and go, they're great, and I'm going to follow their road. And then as you get a bit smarter and a bit wiser and spend a bit of time and pick their brains a bit, and very quickly, when you tug at that thread, you realise there's not much behind it, and it's all about a facade. And there's loads of people in this industry where it is about a facade and there's not much behind it. So probably about 10 years ago, I started trying to understand a bit more behind why people were successful and what differentiated them. Was it their relationship? Was it their skill? Was it their knowledge? And trying to understand who each of those people were and what the IFA or the whoever it was, the wealth manager or investment manager, liked about them, and start to try and build up a sort of and I know everybody says that, they look around and they take all the best from everybody and they build. I started doing that as an account manager, but I always knew that I wanted to lead. So I started to look at leaders and drill down to what were you like as a leader, because I always thought my skill was more. And I was very successful as a salesperson, but I always liked more the leadership element of coaching and developing and bringing people on, taking people from the start of their journey through and helping them to not make the mistakes that I made, and understanding what that meant and what skills I would have to be able to do that. So you sort of start to become a bit of I thought become a bit of a leader while you were still doing the job, and become a bit of a role model person to go to. And I think that's probably what started me on the journey.
It's almost that element of kind of lead by example, and therefore once you put yourself in that position of authority, that you have an ultimate responsibility to behave with integrity, and kind of then you start to just form your behaviours off the back of that.
Yeah, but I mean, again, to the point that I made around, I had role models that I thought were good and weren't. So when I was leading by example, I was leading by example of others that I thought was the best way to do it, and then the point was, it's quickly realising that wasn't the way to do it. So what I thought was leading by example wasn't. But when I look back now, I'm like, that wasn't leading by example. So being the noisiest person in the room, bitching and moaning about everything, being the voice for the team. I was that guy that would go around my team, take on board what everybody would say, and then sit in the management meeting and sort of say, this is all the things that we're unhappy about, and then nobody'd back you up. So I was a sort of
scapegoat.
Yeah, pretty much a scapegoat. They were happy. I was the hand grenade. I went in and blew everything up, and everybody just never said anything. So again, it was about looking at all those role models and saying, what are these role models? Are people that what should I not be doing, and how I shouldn't follow, and who are the good ones, and who have got the good attributes, and what I should do. And if you guys have been in the industry a while, I'm sure you've met some really good and some really bad managers, leaders, directors, whatever it may be. And the industry's littered with people who just get to a certain point by tenure, because they've been around long enough. They get to they become the area manager because, well, the last area manager done 35 years and retired, and now they were the next, longest serving person, so they stepped up at the plate. And I don't think that's what leaders should be. Leaders should be, have the skills of leaders. I've had loads of managers who have got no leadership skills whatsoever. When I think back, and I would ask them questions about what's your management style like, and they'd be like, well, I just need to make sure you do your stats. I just want to make sure you do your 15 or 20 meetings a week, and you build a pipeline and you manage the pipeline. It's no leadership. It's no management. For me, it's, who are you as an individual, and what do you want to get from being a leader? And for me, that's always been about transforming people, developing them. I talk about my leadership style as being transformative and democratic. I want to give autonomy to my team. I want to help coach them and develop them, and add value where I can as individuals, as well as within the sort of remit of their job. But also I want to give them, a democratic right to go out and do it how they think they should be doing it, as opposed to me telling them how it should be done. Because that's not how it works either.
Yeah. We were really fortunate. I think we had at AJ Bell a really good mentor that, as I mentioned about the activity aspect, really laid the foundations for us. And then when we pivoted and moved to Timeline, we started working with Ed Carey, who's now our boss, who took it up a notch. And I think that just by nature of how our career trajectory was going on, we almost needed different aspects from different people. Yeah. So we've kind of noticed that there's traits that we learned from Alison that we still use today. And I'm sure that when, even when I hear myself talking, I can hear Ed channeled through me, because he's taught me so many decent lessons in that sense.
Yeah. It's good to have those people that you can, those sort of, whether they're role models, mentors, whatever you want to call them, they're just people that you do have them, they're sort of their voices ringing in your ears, you know, when you're I used to think about like an old manager I had when I would go to do a presentation, and I used to say to him, I'd be absolutely bricking it at the side of you, you'd be standing there waiting for it to go on, you'd be sitting in the front row, you know, be sitting there shaking, you know. I struggled with anxiety my whole life, which is a real, when I tell people that, like, it never showed, you know, because I was good at hiding it. But I'd be a nervous wreck. I'd be having panic attacks the night before and the morning of presentations. You know, I'd be standing outside IFA's office or sitting in my car, literally about to have a panic attack, thinking, how am I going to go in and sit in front of these 12 people and talk to them about what I need to talk to them about? But then you just sort of learn to cope with that and deal with that through loads of help and pharmaceutical intervention, legal pharmaceutical intervention, I should add. But and then you develop the sort of and I think that's important, because I think a lot of salespeople are quite self-conscious. They're a bit insecure. They you know, salespeople like the win, but they like to be liked. So I found that a real challenge. So I used to have that, and the sales managers, most sales managers used to say to me, Brian, just go to the toilet before you go to present. Just compose yourself. Just take 10 deep breaths. You know your stuff. At that point, start to think about what is you're taking your breath. Start to think about what you're going to say, and then go out and say it, because you know it. You've got it. You know you've got it inside you. You know it. Yep. And that was the bit. Just something simple like that. But when I was 27, 28. I was just flapping, I was panicking, you know, and him just telling me that and guiding me through and giving me that sort of right, okay, I know I'm good enough, I know I've got the knowledge, if I just calm down, it will come out. And through my career, whether I've been presenting in front of 6 people, 12 people, 50 people, that was always the case. I still panicked and I still flapped, but I just went away, calmed myself down, and went out and, you know, delivered what I had to deliver, and hopefully it made sense most of the time. So
and you've held kind of senior positions. So we take sales director at Rathbones, head of now at Octopus, with 14 sales individuals underneath you. Taking that jump from boots on the ground, me and Will, regional sales, to head of, what are kind of some of the key skills that you need to hone to get across that?
I think it's really understanding who you are as a sort of a, you know, leader. I think that's really, really crucial. Like I said, I think a lot of managers and leaders that I had over the years had no discernible style or any real idea about what a leader was. I was very fortunate that I did an MBA, and my focus and specialism on that was leadership. And it really taught me about, you know, what it takes to be a leader, and what are those attributes, and finding your own leadership style. So when I moved into that sort of a world, it was about, you know, understanding who I was as a leader and what I wanted my style to be. Understanding what that looked like from my perspective and from the team members' perspective, and understanding that managers need to be flexible, leaders need to be flexible to the
dealing
individual.
With different personalities, aren't you?
Absolutely.
For each individual person, you've got to kind of tailor that, haven't you?
It's every different person from a demographic perspective, you know, from age, sex, you know, religion, everything. You've got to take all these things into consideration. I think back when I first started in the industry, and I think most of the managers that I probably had would be sacked now because of the HR environment that we now operate in. And thankfully, most of those dinosaurs are gone from the industry. But that adaptability is fundamentally important. When I'm dealing with, you know, somebody in my team who's 22-year-old and it's their first foray into financial services, it's very different to dealing with a 65-year-old salesperson who has been there, seen it, done it, and knows everything and all the rest of it. And what they need and want from me is different. So therefore, I have to be flexible and adapt to that. But equally so, my style is still transformed. I still want to make them better, whether you're 65 or 21. I still want to help you be better, be more successful, deliver what you want to deliver, as well as what the company is asking you to deliver. And that's fundamentally, you know, how I set myself up. But it's tough because you still learn every day. You know, every one-to-one I have, I come out and I think to myself, you know, I'm very self-critical and I self-assess myself. I talk to my team loads about holding the mirror up. And I do that to myself, you know, at the end of every day, end of every week, month, or whatever it is. I'm holding the mirror up and going, you know, could I have been better there? Could I have done that different? Could I have asked different questions? And all I want to do is make sure that I can have an impact in a positive way on the team members in the way that I know some of my some of my mentors and leaders had on me in a positive way, not the negative ones.
That makes sense. You obviously in that rise through to senior leadership, you will have gone through building sales teams. You've gone through a lot of interviews, hiring, probably some firing as well. What are the traits that you're looking for during that interview process that you believe would be, a precursor to a successful sales rep?
I mean, we've been interviewing a lot recently, so I've saw the good, bad, and the ugly. I think most people sort of fall down interviews because they want to just unload. It's like a diatribe. They just want to tell you everything they've got to tell you in that 1 hour, whatever it is. And years gone back, folks to say to me, you make a decision in the first 10, 15 minutes whether you like the person or whether you're going to hire them or not. And I don't believe that's the case, because I like stages of interviews. I like to sort of have a quick call, get to know somebody, then move on to a sort of a longer, bit more, right, let's do a bit more competency based, not in the old school tell me about a time, but a bit more, let's talk about your career, let's look at your CV, what have you done, where have you done it, and how have you done it, and then a bit more into the sort of a next stage of a sort of, right, show me a plan, show me what you would do when you hit the ground running, how are you going to do the job. Role plays for me are a bit hit and miss. It's an unnatural environment. I've saw some of the best salespeople I've ever known crumble in a sort of a internal role play situation, because it's internal and it's very different and it's not real. It's not sitting in front of an IFA. So I like a sort of a bit of a prolonged process to get to know people, but equally so in that initial stages of an interview, I want to see dynamism. I want to see energy. Yeah. I don't want you to unload energy on me as if you've just had 5 cans of Red Bull and you're desperate to tell me everything you've ever known about being an IFA salesperson. But equally so, I want to see that drive and determination that will differentiate you from some of the others. And I would say most recently in interviewing, that's been the biggest difference. Yeah. The people that come in with this sort of energy and excitement about working for Octopus Investments as it is, and there's a genuineness to it as well. It's not just I'm desperate for a job, so I'm going to tell you I'm desperate. Because you can pick through that quite quickly. Tell me about why you want to work for Octopus. Yep. What is it? And they don't know anything behind that. But the ones who have sort of went away, done their homework, understood what the company is, what we're trying to achieve, where we're trying to go, understand the values and the culture, and then talk to me about aligning that with their drive, goals, and culture. That's fundamentally important for me. And it was when I moved from my last job to this job, I spent a long time trying to make sure that it aligned for me. Yeah. I didn't want just to jump into a job. I wanted to make sure that it was, almost like, here's my 10 tick boxes, and I want to be able to tick at least 8 of them for the next job that I go to. And I think people need to demonstrate that in interviews, and I don't always think people do that. That
passion and that enthusiasm, that lust for life. I remember listening to Justine's interview, and Justine was mentioning about, I want to see them passionate about something. And if they can translate that to work, they're going to be unstoppable.
Yeah. We used to do at Rathbones, we said to them, regardless of the position, we used to say to them in the sales team, just present on something, because we wanted to see how passionate you were. And you saw everything from, somebody coming in and pitching, Japanese equities, to somebody telling you how much they loved West Ham. But it was good because football, people are passionate about their football team or their rugby team, aren't they? So just to see somebody present super passionately about, I love West Ham because of this, I love Japanese equity because of that, and it showed you that desire, and you could see the energy and the excitement when they're talking about it. Yeah, exactly. I know. When the guy did come in with a sort of a claret and blue painted on his face, it was a bit much. But equally so, you want to see that. You want to see, because I want my team to be high energy. I want them to be, driven and determined to succeed, because they are fundamental, core beliefs, core attributes of a salesperson, aren't they? But also I want to see that there's a willingness to go out and understand the company that they want to come and work for, that they understand that they've spoke to people who work for the company and understand the culture, what it's like, they understand what the values are like of the company, and they align to their goals, truly align to their goals, not just saying, I've always wanted to work for a B Corp. Why do you want to work for a B Corp? What does that actually mean to you? Why is it important? Do you know what I mean? But like Patagonia, because they're a B Corp, right? You've went on to ChatGPT and asked, what a B Corp is, and tell me, I want to see more than that. I want to see that you've actually done a bit of digging and understand who this company are, and tell me that that's who you are. and show me and demonstrate that's who you are.
Yeah, we're always mentioning we've had Justine Randall on, who's Chief Commercial Officer at Tatton a few weeks ago now. A podcast has just gone live if anyone's watching.
Fantastic firm.
Yeah, and we had a really interesting conversation around kind of base salary versus bonus as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you motivate someone in that sales position?
Yeah.
So how do you think it's best to do that?
It's one of those things. I think this sort of sales distribution world is not scientific at all, and we keep trying to make it super scientific. So we look at different ways of remunerating people, and we look at statistics, and we look at the sort of MI that we can look on. We look at activity, and it's never going to be that, because there is an element of sort of a alchemy to it. But I think when it comes to sort of a remuneration, you want to create a structure that the people are coming in know that they can. If they work hard and they're successful, then they can be paid well. Yep. I personally believe that if you can translate that into, for every X that they bring into the company, there's a pound, they know exactly what they earn from it. I think that's really important, because people like to see tangibility. They like to the success. I've worked under a variety of different structures, from a team target where you're doing your bit because your region is maybe a smaller region in terms of the national picture. So you're maybe pitching in and you're thinking you're doing really well, but the London patch isn't doing as well. So therefore you're not succeeding because the team's not succeeding. Yep. And therefore that individual part of it is gone. I've worked under structures where it's 75% individual, 25% team. And I think that's a good structure, because you want to know that there's a self-policing element to it where you're doing your bit, but also the team needs to pull their weight. And if it isn't, if you've got mature salespeople in the environment, they can sort of say, what's going on? Can I help you? Is there anything I can do? What's the barriers to, succeeding? Is there anything that you find that you're really struggling to? So you have that team self-policing, which is good. I think a sort of a behavioural discretionary bonus is really important, because, you want people to succeed. So you want them to be delivering the sort of a metrics, the numbers, but equally so you want them to do that in a certain way. Yeah. How are they going about that? How are they going about their job? Behaviours are so important to me. I've saw some really good businessmen who have got terrible behaviours. Yep. Really good salespeople, have got terrible behaviours. So they're successful in spite of all these poor behaviours. And I kind of want to see both. So I like that model as well. Yeah.
I think that's really important, because we know markets go in peaks and troughs. Yeah. We've seen over the past kind of couple of months, and having something there which really kind of puts emphasis on the behaviours, meaning they can still earn money, even if things are going against them, is really important. Yeah, really important.
It's funny, I've got quite a young sales team in the London office. Some of them are first jobs in the industry, and trying to help them understand market volatility is quite tricky. And when markets are a bit choppy or a bit all over the place, I think the longer you've been in the industry, you become a bit more sanguine to it. You become a bit more, it is what it is. You sort of I shrug my shoulders a little bit when I see these things, and I think we're here for the long game. And over the long game, let's look, extrapolate that graph out, and look how pretty it looks when you do that. But if you've just come in the door, or you're only a couple of years in the door, and let's be honest, a lot of people who've been in the industry for 5-6 years have had a fairly easy time of it from a market perspective. So trying to help them understand that, right, you've got your base salary, and there's an element of bonus, and there'll be some good quarters and some bad quarters. There might be a good year and a bad year. But dedicate time and effort to this, and you'll see that success. When I was at Pru, from being a telephone account manager earning next to nothing and no bonus, to sort of then getting into the field and earning, being the sort of a master of your own destiny, having a good basic salary, company car, and a good bonus structure, through to Old Mutual, where it was, good first foray into asset management for me. It was a great basic salary, company car, car allowance, and great bonus structure. Rathbones was very much the team structure, where everybody pitched in, and it was successful and made a great growth trajectory. But in all of those journeys, we had massive peaks and troughs in the market. But when I look back over the whole piece, I'm like, we earned bloody well over that period. Yeah, there was some down years, but there was some good years. Yeah. But that sort of line of equilibrium was pretty good. Yeah. And I think sometimes the short-termism that we drive through bonus structures is a bit like, that was a crap quarter, I only earned this. Yeah, but it's only a quarter. It's only a half year.
You'll
It's only
bounce
a
back.
year.
Even better.
You'll there's good times always round the corner, you know, if you believe in the company, and if you don't, that's a different conversation, you know. And I'm always happy to, I was taught many years ago that the door's not locked. If you want to leave, you know, you've got the final veto. You can leave whenever you want. And it's not my job to help people believe that the company is definitely going to be successful, but I can give you my insight into it. And if you're willing to give me and the company your, you know, dedication and resource and time, then you're going to earn well out of this, because that's what it remunerates people for, you know, longevity and success and deliverables. So
that patience and resilience that you went back to earlier, that probably for those younger members of staff that you're talking about who are finding it difficult when markets are choppy and things like that, that whether they're earning or learning, it might depend on which way the wind's blowing in terms of markets, but by just being in there and being present with that process, that they are at least getting one of those, ideally both.
I said to not one of my team, but another sales guy from a different organisation, I said, remember when we were 20 odds, you know, 24, 25, and all we wanted was the superficial aspects of this job, you know what I mean? You'd look, and I remember asking one of the sort of investment specialists in a firm a few years back, I was like, you know, how should I dress? And it was like, right, get yourself a couple of good suits made, you know what I mean? Get this is what your shirt should look like, this is your ties, and this is, go to Lokes and buy your shoes, you know, all of that kind of a stuff. And I was like, right, this is all the important stuff, you know, and then get yourself a Mont Blanc pen and all
turn up in a nice car.
Yeah, absolutely. All this sort of superficial stuff that in reality doesn't matter. And I one of the guys was saying to me, you know, he thinks that people are more superficial now and they want success quicker now than they did. And I was like, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think sales, maybe what they want is slightly different in terms of the sort of a material objects, you know, whether it's, I was learning the other day that young guys call watches kettles now. And I thought that was fascinating, because I heard the young guys say,
Mark's has got his on it. It floats in the bath.
I could see it glinting in my eye there. So, but I was listening to them talking in the office, and they were saying, I'm going to put some money by every quarter for my bonus and buy myself a new kettle. And I was like, what kind of kettle are you buying? Do you know what I mean? I was like, how expensive is this kettle going to be? And then I was educated that means watch. So I think maybe the objects that people want are different from when I was a bit younger. Maybe it was just me, watches didn't bother me. It was about having a nice car or whatever, and going nice holidays and all that kind of stuff. But so I do think that the sort of superficial element of the industry, the drive to succeed's there, what you want from that's there, but it will come. You've just got to dedicate your time to it. It's like any craft, isn't it? You know, learn, educate yourself, never stop. You know, I finished my master's a year and a half ago, and I'm sitting now sort of getting a bit tetchy, going, what do I do next? What am I going to go and learn next? You know, and I try and engender that in my team, you know, keep learning, because that will just make you better. You know, when the young guys are saying, you know, I need to do RO1 and it's so boring, I'm like, you'll learn stuff from that. I guarantee you'll be on the phone, you'll be having a conversation, and a little light bulb will go off in your head, and you went, I read that in that chapter, and you sound so smart on the phone by recounting that, you know, FCA Act, whatever it is, you know, that'll come across really, really well. You never want that to stop.
Because you spoke about your MBA and the influence that had on you, and at the time that divided opinion when you were going for your MBA at the time. So if you could tell us a little bit about your experience of going through that process, how that was received by the business, but also what advice you'd give to people who may be considering an MBA.
Yeah, I guess if I start why I wanted to do an MBA. So I left school at 18 with very few qualifications. I wasn't really academic. I was quite bright, but I just didn't apply myself. Later in life, I found out it was basically anxiety, that I just couldn't do exams. And ironically, you know, I talked to my dad at the start, and, you know, he taught me, you know, about work ethic and how to be, you know, super driven and determined and you know, put in the effort and you succeed. But my dad did the exact same thing. He just couldn't sit exams. He was too anxious. Yeah. So he was one of the smartest guys I've ever known, but just couldn't pass an exam. And I found that, you know, and later in life, as I got older, I understood that myself. So when all my friends were going to university, I was like, I just need to go out and work. You know, I worked in Morrison's, and then I went into Abbey National, and then into Prudential Financial Services. And I think when I look back, as I was getting a bit older, I always had that sort of a desire to get that, you know, higher, you know, education. I wanted to have something, but I was like, I'm not going to go to uni now. So then it was about looking about what can I do that will bring real value to me, will bring a real sort of a skill set that will help me, you know, push on and elevate myself, and speaking to people and again looking around some mentors and peers. You know, an MBA, Master in Business, became a sort of all right, that sounds really interesting. I'll go and look at what that was. And I went away and done my homework, understood, you know, what it would be, what it would cost, and then started to speak to, you know, the company I was working at the time with. And it was certainly, I mean, they certainly weren't going to fund it, first and foremost, because depending on the way you do it, they can be quite expensive. I went to Warwick Business School, and it was quite expensive. You could buy a fair few kettles for the price of that MBA, but it was
yours
fun.
was probably a better investment.
But it was look, in hindsight, it was the best money I've ever spent in my life. But I had managers and leaders at the time who said to me, "What the hell are you doing? Why are you doing a master's in business? How the hell is that going to help you as a salesperson?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean? It's just pointless exercise. How is that going to help you sell more funds, sell more units?" "Well, do you know what an MBA is?" "No, I don't really know what it is." "Well, it's a degree, isn't it? It's a master's in something, master's in business." "Well, do you realise that the people that we deal with run businesses? You know, IFAs by default become businessmen or businesswomen overnight. You know, most IFAs that I know start from being a one-man band IFA, and then they grow and grow and grow, and before they know it, they're looking down going, God almighty, I'm now a business owner of 50, 60, 100 staff, whatever it may be. And sometimes they need a bit of help how to run a business. So again, from a consultative perspective, I can add value there. And adding value with the best one in the world, whether my fund is top quartile, well, there's always, 15, 20, 30 funds that are top quartile. So how do you differentiate yourself then? Price, muchness now in the marketplace. So you've got to differentiate yourself another way. And it was me bringing more to the table than I thought my peers ever would. And that's what a master brought me. It was also about, elevating and educating myself further, because I had the leadership ambition and I knew where I wanted to go. But yeah, the comment that sticks with me, and as a salesperson, it's important that you remember these things. My boss said to me at the time, "You'll start it and they'll finish it." And I thought to myself, all right, okay.
Here we go.
And in the hardest moments of that Masters, and I started it, it was sort of towards the end of COVID, and I was having to fly up and down to London, Warwick Business School's at the Shard, and I was travelling down, and you're still having to wear masks on planes, and I was funding it, paying for hotels and flights and all the rest of it, and sitting in hotel rooms after, the first couple of nights when you were surrounded by really bright academic people from all over the globe. Had the head of marketing at Sky was there. We had senior consultants in the NHS. We had, people from biotech and medtech, really senior people. And I was like, I'm a fraud, genuine imposter syndrome, like I've never felt in my life before. And I felt it a lot. This was genuine imposter syndrome. But that manager saying that to me, you start it and they'll finish it. So in those toughest moments, I was like, I'll prove you wrong. And I remember just as I was getting towards the end of my dissertation, 35,000 words. I say that to everybody because 35,000 words is a lot of words, and having to write that about a specific subject. And I knew the time was coming that I had to submit it. And I was like, I'm never going to do this. And again, just having that, you can have good words behind you that can push you on, or you can have that negative sort of negativity that pushes you on, and it's about harnessing both. So I had some great people in my corner, my wife, my friends, my family saying, you can do this, mate. You're smart, you're bright, you're going to do it. Don't worry about it. You'll get through it. And that's great. And that's, that puts the wind in your sails. But also, I'm not going to lie, the guy saying to me that I was going to start it and no finish it was probably the fuel that I needed.
I had it when I moved across the timeline. Somebody said, their targets are too big, you won't hit them. I was like, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. And, I think that you mentioned actually about kind of that almost insecurity that salespeople have, that need to be liked, but also the need to prove your worth. That for me, almost that chip on your shoulder that you think, I've got a point to prove, even though no one really cares about you as an individual. You're just part and parcel of their life. Just that one comment just spurs you on, as you say, in those times, like those dark times.
Yeah. Like, as I say, a working class guy for Glasgow, and I hate that sort of a hard luck story, but in this industry, you meet a lot of people from well-heeled backgrounds, sort of a lot of blue bloods in this industry, and I've came across a lot of them. And I think the chip on your shoulder is definitely there. It has been for me, who's this plucky wee working class guy for Glasgow that wants to be something, he didn't go to such and such a school. And I've had that, what school do you go to? When I tell them that, you can see there's sort of a brain ticking over going, don't remember. I don't think that's a fee-paying school, is it? And I've had that loads. What school do you go to? Trinity High. Trinity High. Well, that's a wee school in Cambuslang, just outside Glasgow. And you can see them racking their brain, going, nah. And I'm like, it's not a fee-paying school, mate. So I don't have a tie that I'll wear for the rest of my life that proves I went to a fancy school. I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that background. I'm not saying that coming from that background gives you a leg up and you're successful because of that. But the chip on my shoulder was that I need to prove all these Hooray Henry's wrong type thing. And I probably offend people saying that, but and I've met some great people like that who've helped me along in the industry and agreed with me, that we need diversity in this industry, a diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of race, sex, all these things. The industry will be a far better place if people, as we progress through the industry, have that balance at that level.
And I think part of the reason for us forming Trusted, so myself, Will, and Lewis kind of had this idea of professionalizing sales, but also building a bit of a community around it as well. An interesting question for yourself is, how do we bridge the gap as an industry to be able to work together as peers? Obviously, you guys are at Octopus, we're at Timeline, but we think there could be collaboration done across the different businesses and with everyone who's out there.
Well, it's like most things in life, there's more that unites us and divides us. We fundamentally, we're all doing the same thing with the same people. There's a big pie. And as long as we're all getting a bit of it, we're all relatively happy, aren't we? Time's precious. Our clients' time is really precious now, more so than ever. The burden that our clients have on them from all quarters, be it their clients, be it the regulator, they don't have a lot to give providers anymore. The days of having 2-hour lunches every day of the week are gone. Collaboration's fundamentally important, I think, from that perspective. We can sit in a room and we can all be effectively talking about the same thing, whether it's tax efficient or whatever it might be. And I think there just needs to be maturity that it's a good use for our clients' time to sit and hear from Timeline, Octopus, Foresight, whoever it may be. They might all be talking about business relief or DCTs or whatever it may be. But the IFA is coming along and that's a great use of his time. 2 hours, he saw 3 providers. So there's a collaboration there. And the reality is, in most cases, the clients are probably giving us all a piece of the pie anyway, for this, splitting the clients between us all. And I get as targets grow and increase, you want more of that pie and you want to beat your competitors and stuff like that. And it's nice to have that wee competitive edge, but there's far more unites us than divides us. And I think there just needs to be a maturity about that. I've never been the guy who knocks my competition. I never will be. I'd never engender that into my team. In fact, if I heard any of them doing that, I'd be very, very disappointed. Because in effect, I always thought what you're saying is that, Mr. or Mrs. IFA, you're a clown for using them.
Yeah, you never win any business, do you? You win on your own merits, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not by throwing slander.
You can talk about the differences, and how you can create a gap there, can't you? This is what we do versus what they do. There you go, present both of them. It's up to you to make the right choice. It's your call fundamentally. But I've always collaborated with peers, be it from a life co perspective, from an asset management perspective, and now a sort of tax efficient world. Again, I think it's fundamentally important. It's just we can bring so much technical knowledge into a room that will have different perspectives from different companies because the badge is different that we all carry. That we can sit down in a mature manner and say, right, you cover this, we'll cover that, and the other person will do this, and the audience are away going, what a brilliant use of time was. I've learned so much about the bit that they focused on. I now know more about them as an individual, that part of the company and what they do, and I've got 3 companies' perspectives on that, and I can leave feeling that I've really earned my CPD or my lunch, my free lunch. I really earned it today because I've actually learned so much. Why not? What stops that from happening? Pride, and I've never got it. I've never got it at all.
So 20 plus years in the industry, loads of experience. We've talked about the mistakes, we've talked about the highs and the lows.
Not talked about many mistakes because you're recording. I'll tell you some
not
of
too much detail. If you were looking back, teaching young Brian coming into the industry, from your mistakes, from your experience, what would you tell that younger self?
God, that is a question. I like holding the mirror up, but I usually do it in a sort of a relatively sort of a short-term basis. It's like, how did the week, how did the month, but going back along all those years. I think patience is definitely one. It's easy to say that you're good at something. It's much harder to deliver and prove that you're good at something. And like when you're younger, you get quite cocky and arrogant. And like I say, when I first moved to Manchester, I definitely was. In fact, I walked by the first ever meeting I went into, the first ever office, the first ever meeting I had when I was a field salesperson, just yesterday. And I remember sort of looking at the door, going, "Oh my God!" You know what I mean? I would love to have a recording of what that meeting was like, to look back on it, because I wasn't ready. The job was there, and I interviewed and I got the job, but I wasn't ready. I knew I wasn't. I got ready pretty quickly on the job through making mistakes and learning, but in reality, I don't think the industry can afford you to make as many mistakes as I made back then. You talk about sales forces at Pru. I think we had probably 100 field-based sales guys at that time. It's just not the case anymore. Sales teams are small, regions are bigger. Got to be, you talked earlier on, you've got to be really efficient with your time and resource, and know that you've got the skills that when you have to show up, you can deliver.
Yeah.
So I think patience is really important. Getting the sort of a depth of knowledge of the client was something that I probably didn't do initially. So understanding, again, it's everybody knows it, but you need to know your customer. But I don't think we pay enough time and attention to that. I definitely focused a bit more on the sort of superficial stuff. What's in, tell me what you need from a product provider, but actually what motivates you behind the scenes, what you as an individual, you as a person, what's your goals, where's this business going, all that kind of getting to know a depth of knowledge of the customer and the depth of knowledge of what you're actually out talking about. I think back to some of the meetings where I would go in and I talked about earlier, I know my product inside out, but I didn't know if they wanted the product or needed the product. And then I didn't really understand when they would say no, I'd be like, well, why not? It was because I didn't actually understand their business or what they were trying to achieve, or even the clients that they had, or any of that kind of stuff. So a real depth of knowledge across the industry, what's going on. I talk to my team about broadening and deepening their knowledge, so when you're on, you add value. Every call, you add value. You can talk about things that are going on in their world as opposed to just things that are going on in your world. Everybody talks about the sales funnel. You ask the big questions and you get them down to the sort of does this fit you now? Does this product? But actually just having a conversation about what's impacting them at the moment. Is it regulation? How concerned are they about the pension changes from my team coming forward? Is that a good thing for them? Is that a bad thing for them? What does it mean? That broadening and deepening of your knowledge, understanding their world as well as your world is really important. And I definitely didn't do that. Be careful who you follow. Definitely. I followed some rogues and thought there was a way of doing this. But the industry was a different place 20 odd years ago. And business was maybe done a little bit differently 20 years ago. So I definitely followed some wrong people and looked up to some wrong people. Which makes you make mistakes. Unfortunately, I've had some good people around about me that sort of pick you up from those mistakes and put you back on the right path. Instead of going, zigzagging all over the place, that's a wee bit more sort of just bouncing around. And we all make mistakes because we'll still do it. I do it. We still do it every week. So yeah, definitely be careful who you follow. Understand who you think are good. Well, if you think they're good, understand why you think they're good. And sense check that with other people as well. And I think naturally salespeople are quite susceptible and quite trusting. And I've trusted a lot of people in my career who I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've certainly learnt to not necessarily not trust people, but just be more, I suppose,
mindful.
Yeah, just a bit more sort of a hold back. Yeah. And again, maybe that's just maturity, instead, like I said earlier on, I would sit in rooms and I'd be the one that was happy to shout about everything needed fixed, and then never had any support. Whereas, I'm all about building coalitions now. Before you try and do something, it's always good to have a coalition behind you. Whether it's trying to get product innovation, whether it's trying to get sales targets moved, whether it's trying to shift how we sort of a look at quantity of meetings over quality of meetings, from an activity perspective. It's best to have that coalition of support from a group of people where you can come forward and present the group's position as opposed to you individually. Putting your head above the parapet's good, and it's nice to, if you're confident enough that you can do that. But it's better to do that when there's 4 or 5 people doing it with you, as opposed to you just putting your head above the parapet to be absolutely shot at, which I've done a lot.
Draw the sniper fire.
Yeah, I've done a lot. I've taken a lot of bullets for a lot of team members, and I certainly learned from those mistakes. So self-reflection is super important. I said that earlier on. I asked my team, I implore my team to do it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, quarterly basis. And I think we should all do that as much as we possibly can.
Brian, it's been absolutely unbelievable having you on the podcast, hearing all your insights. Just want to leave you with kind of a final question. Obviously, we've discussed Trusted, what we're kind of building here. Is there any kind of message you'd like to leave with the community that we've got?
Like the question you asked a minute ago about, how do we collaborate and how do we become more connected? Because we are all doing the same job, I think is really an interesting one. It's something that I'll certainly go away and give some thought and time to. When I was talking about having a wee challenge and, triggering my brain post MBA about what I can do, I really like the idea about what you guys are trying to achieve. And I think, it's certainly something I'm going to go away and spend a bit of time and give some consideration, and be happy to come back and work with you guys and have a chat about it, because I think it's powerful. I genuinely do. I don't just say that because you guys have invited me on. I think it is powerful. I've got loads of friends in this industry who are IFAs, and they talk about product providers negatively a lot across the board of all the different facets of financial services. We need to get better at what we do, and I think collaboration's a big part of that. I wish you guys the best of luck, and if I can help you along the journey, I'll be more than happy to.
Brilliant.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Good.